Okay, what is your first name?
Mazie,
And where do you live?
10105 Howe Drive, Leawood, Kansas.
Tell me how heart disease has personally touched your life.
Well, my husband had open heart surgery in January of 2000. And do you want details of
Sure.
what he had? Well, you don't want the whole story because it's too long. But he'd been out of town the day before, flying to 4 or 5 different locations along the East Coast. He left early in the morning and got home late that night. And the next morning, he woke up and he says, feels heavy on my chest. So I got out of bed and I took his blood pressure and I took his blood sugar, and everything was fine. And I gave him an aspirin, and then I called the doctor. Well, the doctor, of course, wasn't in because it was early that morning, but I thought the doctor would, get the message, but he apparently didn't because he was at a different location, and he never called back. So I called I called the hospital, and they said bring him into the emergency room. So he, got up and got dressed and shaved and did the whole routine that he goes through, and I drove him to the hospital, and we couldn't park where we normally park, and so he gets out of the car and walks into the emergency room, but by the time I get the car parked, they are taking him into the little room where he was to be, and he had an irregular heartbeat, and things went on. And anyway, I'm not sure you want all this, but anyway, when they finally get around to it, they call in a cardiologist, which I would have thought they would have called one in as soon as they found out he had an irregular heartbeat, but they didn't. And when they called the cardiologist in, he said, okay, we'll go down and do a heart catheterization. So we went and had a heart catheterization. But at that time, our doctor arrived, and I told him what was going on, and he says, well, I'll go in and see how he's doing. So he went in to see how Bob was doing, and he came back out, and he says, Bob needs, I think it was 3 bypasses. And about 5 seconds after he gets that out of his mouth, the first cardiologist comes out and says, your husband needs open heart surgery in 5 minutes, and we do not have a surgeon. I said, get him to St. Luke's. We cannot take him to St. Luke's. I'm calling in another cardiologist, and he has a 99% fatality, 1% that he'll come through the procedure. So
Let me stop you just for a second. How are you processing all of this, and what is your emotional state when you're sitting around and you feel like no one's helping you?
Bum, very low. When someone comes out and tells you your husband needs open heart surgery in 5 minutes and we don't have a surgeon, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So anyway, they did the procedure. They called in the second cardiologist, and he did the procedure and came through it. And I said, get him to St. Luke's. And they said, okay. And, of course, I've called the family. I've called Children's Mercy Hospital because my husband was in charge of a big meeting at Children's Mercy Hospital that day, and the grandkids are supposed to be in it. And I called Mr. Dunn, and Mr. Dunn, first thing he says, get him to St. Luke's. And I said, we can't move him. We have to wait till he gets stabilized. And then by the time they got him through that procedure, they called, apparently, St. Luke's. and St. Luke's had had a code blue in the heart area, and so they said we couldn't go to St. Luke's right away. But when we got to St. Luke's, he went, of course, in an ambulance. My son and I drove, and we bypassed the emergency room because of Mr. Dunn talking to Hastings and told him what was going on, and so we went right into the heart area and met the Dr. Borcon and a nurse, a wonderful, wonderful nurse. They never asked me for, his Medicare card, insurance, nothing. And after talking about maybe 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes, then my son and I went into the waiting room. And when about 2 hours later, one of the doctors, I believe he was the anesthesiologist, came out and said, "We have something far worse than bypass surgery." His aorta has been dissected internally. And Lynn, I found out from Lynn at Heart Rehab that when they dissect or catch the inside of the aorta, it will run just like her example was a lady's stocking. And so his went from his heart to his kidney. And so when this doctor came out to tell us that they had to do something with that before they could ever do the bypasses, and he said he'll have a 50% chance. So our chances were going up. You have to be happy that things weren't as bad as they had been.
Up until this point, it kind of sounds like you're like in robot mode. Like, we just gotta have a problem, we have to solve it, we have to fix it. When did you just sort of sit and let it all sink in? Like, this is scary.
Well, probably the 2 hours that I waited between the time St. Luke's really took him and when the first doctor came out to tell me what was going on. And they were having to lower his body temperature, so the flow of the blood is slower and your heart rate, my understanding, is slower and this type of thing. And so that 2 hours is when...
What was the hardest part for you during that 2 hours?
Waiting and wondering, what was going on. And the unknown is, to me, always the hardest part. Not knowing what was really wrong with him or what they were going to have to do. And so about 2 hours after that, then somebody came out, I can't remember if it was a doctor or a nurse, and said that they were raising his body temperature now, getting ready to do the bypass surgery. And so they did the bypass surgery and came out. Dr. Borcon is wonderful. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. And he came out and told us that, Bob had made it through. He says, we're not out of the woods yet. We got long, time to go. But he told us that his kidneys may not work, his hands may not work, his legs may not work, and his brain may not work. And so we would have to just wait and see how this was going. So we had gotten to, this day started around 7 o'clock in the morning, and we had gotten to St. Luke's about 4, and we finally got to see Bob around midnight. So it was a long day.
And was he responsive? Were you able to actually speak with him?
Oh,
or
no,
was he out?
no,
Okay.
no. But the nurse said to me, not the first time, because I think our daughter and son and I both, all three of us got to go in. So not at that time. He was, you just look at this body in that bed that's no response or anything, and all these machines moving and clicking, but then I asked the nurse, his nurse, if I could come back in, even though you're not supposed to go into intensive care except certain hours. And she says, you can come back in anytime you want to. So my son and I stayed at the hospital, and I went in, I don't know, between 2 and 3, and she says, Mrs. Long, come here. Because I just stood at the bottom of the bed, the first time. She said, come here. She says, walk up here by the side of the bed. She said, Mr. Long, and his eyes opened. So you knew his brain had some function. But, of course, his eyes weren't focused or anything. And she said, move your toes. Can you move your toes? And even with all the stuff they had on him, I think they were still keeping his body warm. It looked like an air thing, might have water in it, trying to still bring his temperature up. Maybe, I don't know what I'm talking about, But you could see his toes move under all of that stuff.
Did that give you hope?
Oh, of course. Oh, of course.
So what happened next?
So then, I went in to see her once more before I knew her shift ended, and everything was according to her. Everything was, doing okay. And then at breakfast, when my son and I went to breakfast, Ben McAllister, we knew Ben from other civic things, and it's, Ben's name as well as Dr. Reed has always, back then, Reed and McAllister were the heart people in Kansas City. And so Ben saw me at breakfast, and he says, I've been in to see Bob. And he says, things look great, really. He says, we're still not out of it, but he says, things really look great. Well, of course, having known Ben and Virginia and Jenny, having someone that tell you that, not just a nurse or someone really, that really meant an awful lot to me for Ben, and that's what I've tried to relay to Jenny now that Ben is gone. But he did, with both surgeries, he would go in and see Bob and come tell me how he was doing and that type of thing. And Bob did very well.
How is Bob doing today? Did he make it?
No, he died in December of 2009. Our daughter died in 2008, and he died in 2009. No, he had to have another surgery. Borcon kept watching him because of the dissected aorta, which some people call an aneurysm. The way I understand it, blood is flowing on two sides of a membrane that has been internally, and so there's always this possibility of the bulge. Well, he started to have a bulge in 2005, 5 years later, and Borcon thought that they had to do invasive open, and but by then they had the cardiology groups had split, and one went to KU, and we were with Dr. Harbreck. That's who Borcon, whether he was on call or what, but Borcon chose Harbreck to be Bob's cardiologist. And so by that time, Dr. Harbreck was at KU. So we said to both of them, what are we going to do now that you're, at different locations and hospitals? And both of them said, you can see, both of us, because we're friends, we'll work together, we'll do things together. So Borcon said, if Dr. Harbreck would like to have someone at KU see his records and this type of thing, let's do that. So we did. We went to KU, and
so he made it through this experience and then passed away a few years later?
Yeah.
So,
The 2005 surgery,
right.
He made it through as well.
How long was it before he was able to come home from the initial first experience?
Oh, 10 days.
About 10 days?
Yeah.
And how did your life change after that? I mean, did you feel like we have to watch what we eat, we have to make all these changes?
Yes. I would say we made, we were very careful with what we had already knew, not to eat the fried things and the fat and this type of thing, but we were more careful after his surgery. And
how did it change your relationship knowing that you were at that time so close to losing him?
You learn to appreciate one another more and to try to take every day, one day at a time, and count your blessings and, each day try to be kind to one another, and he was very much involved in the city, and so about the second day after, or maybe it was the third day after he had his first surgery, he received 21 floral arrangements. The volunteers that were bringing the flowers to our room asked my sister, said, "Who is this man?" And she says, "Well, he's just involved in a lot of things." And we had so many flowers. We had him out at the nurse's desk. We took next door to Bob's room was they had a code blue. Is why we couldn't move him to St. Luke's right away. And it was this young man that had similar surgery, the aorta surgery. And so we became friends. You become friends with a lot of the people that are in the waiting room. You're all anxious, you're all afraid, and so I'm not very good at doing this interview, but it's not hard for me to talk to people, and we met his aunt. She was just very, very nice. So we would take flowers give flowers to him, and then we'd ask the nurses if there was somebody else that didn't have any flowers, and there was an elderly woman that didn't have flowers, and so we would give her, some of his flowers and this type of thing. So
after going through this experience, how has it changed you? Like if you see someone else that is going through a heart health situation. Those that come into heart rehab, there's a man that was in the other day that has the vest-like thing that you pull together when you cough or sneeze, and we all were very, very
I think we all try to be very, and not only with the heart patients, but around the outside edge of the heart rehab is physical rehab. And there is a man that came in a wheelchair, was in really, really bad situation, and we've all seen him progress. He didn't come for a while then, but now he's back doing more types, and we'll say to him, "Oh, how great, you're doing great. You look," and his wife told me, she says, "Oh, you're so kind to tell him that he's doing better," and he now has some kind of a thing on his leg that apparently shocks or stimulates the nerve so that he can walk better. He's walking. Came in a wheelchair. And then one of our own heart people, this has been a number of years ago, he came in a wheelchair, and he'd had a stroke, and he got so he could walk, and so you see there's a young lady, I forget what, she had strokes when she was just a tiny little girl, and you can see it's much, much slower, the progress, but we all try to,
You just kind of feel like
encourage.
you're almost a family because you all understand what everyone's going through.
When Bob died, I think there were 8 of the men came to his funeral. 3 of the exercise or nurse RNs came to the funeral. One of the exercise gals had quit and started working at a school closer to her home. She came to the funeral. One of the nurses that knew she had to work the day of the funeral, she came by the house. So, it was almost 10 years, you became like a family. And to back up, how I, got involved really was that when Bob came in January of 2000, heart rehab here was fairly new, and there weren't that many patients. So they said spouses or significant others could come. We'd have to pay, but we could come and exercise. And Bob says, "Well, you have to drive me, so why don't you?" So I got started then, and after he died, I was in that routine of every Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning to come to heart rehab. So I have continued, so it will be 16 years in January that I have been coming to heart rehab. And it's
taking care of your own
right,
body.
right. So, it's been good for me. I've added another exercise class for old women. On the same day as I have a half-hour break between heart rehab and going to BioFit, and it's a completely different type. I'm going because I do have a little problem with balance. I have inner ear and fluid and eustachian tubes a lot, and so that affects my balance. And it's a group.
Trying to stay healthy.
Right. I am Mazie Long, and I go red for my personal health. I want to uncover the truth about heart disease because it affects everybody, not just myself, but my whole family, my sisters, the whole friends. To stay healthy is why.